Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this virtual event on Swedish-American cooperation in the era of COVID-19, hosted by the Atlantic Council in collaboration with the Swedish-American Chambers of Commerce of the USA, SAC USA, and the Swedish Embassy. My name is Barry Pavel. I'm director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security and a senior vice president there. I'm very pleased to welcome three distinguished voices to our online conversation today. Ambassador Karin Olofsdotter, the Ambassador of Sweden to the United States, Michael Anderson, an Atlantic Council Board Director, Saab Executive and new Chairman of SAC USA, and Johan Marcus, President and Executive Director of SAC USA. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to our audience for tuning in. The coronavirus era is upon us, and we have all begun to adapt much of how we go about our lives, our home life, our work life, regional lives, etc. And while we do not yet know all of the long-term implications of this pandemic for foreign policy and transatlantic relations, we're certain that it will have profound impacts on all of this, both now and in the longer term. Addressing those impacts strategically is essential for the success and survival of our countries and transatlantic relations. Here at the Council Scowcroft Center, we focus on practical solutions for countering the security challenges of today and tomorrow, and in honor of General Brent Scowcroft's legendary career of public service, our mission is to develop nonpartisan strategies to address these types of challenges in the closest possible cooperation with the United States and U.S. allies. Last week, for example, we launched a new series called Shaping the Post-COVID-19 World Together, and that included the first installment by a former senior intelligence community official who actually projected this type of world crisis when he wrote intelligence documents in 2008. And since then, his name is Matthew Burrows, and he and his colleague outlined three scenarios for the future world order and the geopolitical and regional implications of the pandemic, as well as opportunities for global engagement and leadership in its wake. Effectively countering these types of challenges requires the United States to work extremely closely with allies and partners. This cannot be handled well alone. And in that spirit, Ambassador Olofsdotter will join us to discuss both the Swedish approach to COVID-19 and its effects on business and trade between Sweden and the United States. We are very honored to closely engage with our Swedish partners on the most important issues of our time, including our event yesterday with Sweden's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Anna Lindh, on the impact of COVID-19 for transatlantic relations. And we've also seen Ambassador Olofsdotter recently as we've convened to bring key allies and partners together during this crisis. To kick off this event, I'd like to introduce the next speaker. That speaker is Mr. Johan Marcus, President and Executive Director of SAC USA. Mr. Marcus has accumulated more than 20 years of experience in business development in a variety of industries. He served as a negotiator and the managing director of the Swedish Commerce Employers Association, deputy CEO at the Swedish Trade Federation, vice president and head of international relations at the Swedish Postal Service, Swedish Trade Commissioner to Kenya, and a number of other very important positions, including board membership on a variety of forums. We look forward to Johan's remarks. He will then introduce Ambassador Olofsdotter and Michael Anderson for our moderated conversation. Before I turn it over to Johan, I would like to remind everyone that this event is public and on the record. To our audience on Zoom, please do engage in the conversation by asking your questions in the Q&A bar below. Towards the end of the event, Johan will take as many questions as he can and pose them to the ambassador and to Mr. Anderson. Once again, thank you all for being with us for what I know will be a captivating conversation on Swedish-American cooperation in the era of COVID-19. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you so much, Barry, and we are honored to do this in collaboration with the Atlantic Council and partner also in other project. It's really our pleasure, so thank you. Barry, as Barry said, is the SVP of Atlantic Council, but Barry has also a distinguished career from the Defense Department, where he served at, for example, the NSC, National Security Board, for under both President Obama and President Bush. So we're very honored to partner with you. Short about SAC USA, the Swedish-American Chambers of Commerce in the US. We consist of 20 great regional chambers all across the country, and we are working to accelerate Swedish trade and investments between US and Sweden. We are doing more than 300 events all across the country, and we help companies to establish and grow on the US market through our great regional chambers. I have the honor now to introduce our excellent ambassador, Mrs. Karin Olofsdotter. Karin has a long career and successful career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she has been the chief of staff for many ministers, and she has also been the Director General for Trade. So trade is something she really knows about. Karin has previously also been the ambassador for Hungary. Karin will be moderated by our new chairman, Michael Anderson. Michael has a long career from our Swedish defense company Saab Group. Michael has, among others, been the CEO of Saab Support and Services and also Saab Aircraft, and is now heading the US market. So please, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you so much. Ambassador, thank you for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to have you here. These are unprecedented times indeed, and we've had to rethink so many ways how we execute our daily lives and business and so forth. How has this impacted you and your role as ambassador and the operation at the embassy? What measures have you taken, and how has this impacted your planned activities?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for arranging this and putting the spotlight on Sweden. It's a great honor, of course, to be part of this. And first of all, I would just like to, if there's anyone out there listening who has lost someone due to the virus, or has been sick yourself, or having hardship with your companies and so on, our heartfelt thoughts are with you, of course. This is an enormous tragedy that we all have to handle, and which, of course, as you said, Michael, has really changed how we operate. Well, the embassy is open, but we're not at the embassy. So I'm actually sitting in a walk-in closet in my home with my iPad online. So we operate the embassy by Skype. We do still lots of reporting, of course, lots of consular affairs. Swedes who have a lot of questions on how to leave the United States if they're here on a temporary stay. We've handled quite a lot of Swedes who have been on those huge cruise ships that's been around, as many of you have followed, of course. We also get a lot of questions on visas, etc. So we are operating. It's just that we're not at the embassy physically unless we have to issue an emergency passport and so on. And I must say, I don't know how you feel, but it works better than I expected to do like this, to be virtually, or even though it's awful not to meet in person.
No, absolutely, and I concur with you in terms of running our business. Saab, it's worked surprisingly well. We're blessed with having this technology available and being able to execute. I'm also not in my wardrobe, but in my small home office here in Virginia, in Arlington. But how do you execute diplomacy during these situations? I know that you've had a virtual event with the Minister of
Yes,
Affairs.
yeah, we are very proud actually. Our foreign minister, Ann Linde, that was mentioned before, she was supposed to have come here on the 29th of April. It was a long time planned, a meeting with her counterpart, Secretary Pompeo. And then when we realized, of course, this wasn't going to be possible, then they were going to have a telephone call.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, well, why not make a virtual visit out of it? So we were thinking and planning for all the events that we would have had if she was actually here physically. So usually when a minister comes, you usually have an arrangement with a think tank where that person can speak. So we reached out to the Atlantic Council, had a great discussion, a morning breakfast discussion online that was seen by a lot of people. So that was great. She had the telephone call, of course, with Mr. Pompeo, Secretary Pompeo. She met the staff at the embassy. That's also usually part of it. And she was interviewed by Politico. And then, for those of you who have been to Washington to see our embassy, we have a fantastic event center, which is actually our exhibit hall. And we produced an online version of our exhibits. So we wanted to be like the Louvre and the British Museum. And now you can visit us online. So if you're sitting somewhere else in the country or even in Washington, as we are not open, please do visit our exhibit. And the minister inaugurated it. So
Nice.
if on Twitter, if you search #virtual-visit, you will find it. And visit the embassy homepage as well. You can find all about it. So it was actually really great. And I think this is unfortunately the way we will have to operate for a while, because those visits will not be able to, physically happen. So I think if you can focus on a country and try to make for a small country like Sweden, create a buzz around your country with doing those kinds of events when you have political talks, that's in a way a new way of trying to reach out. And of course, one of the only few good things about this is that, of course, through these webinars that we all take part in, we reach so many more people, and you yourself can learn and take part in so many more things that you would do ordinarily. So I hope that this is not something we will let go of once we can meet in person again.
No, and I think this event is a very good example of this. SAC network needed to connect with their members and the network. So this was a very good opportunity to try new ideas. You are in charge of the largest presence abroad and the largest embassy. Why is the US-Swedish relations so important?
Well, for being Sweden, this is a large embassy. If this was a US embassy, I don't think it would even open. They are much bigger than ours. Well, anyway, the relationship with the United States is probably one of the most important relationships we have in the world. Not surprisingly, the US economy is the world's most important economy. It's the engine of the world business and economic life. When it comes to security policy, it is also the most important country, democracy-wise, and trade-wise, and so on. And we have a very long history. We actually go back to 1638 when we had a settlement in Delaware. Unfortunately, lost very shortly to the Dutch. We don't talk so much about that. No, so of course, having a good relationship with the United States is of crucial importance for a country like mine, and for most countries, of course, in the world. We are a member of the European Union, as I'm sure everyone knows. So that relationship that's almost more like domestic policy, because the European Union entails all issues. But so for regular foreign policy relation, the United States is, of course, one of the most important. And just figure-wise, when it comes to trade, the US market is always top 3 when it comes to services as well as goods.
Yeah.
And this is also our biggest market for foreign investments, Swedish investments abroad. So, of course, what happens here is of crucial importance to Swedish business life and Swedish economy. And Sweden, as you know, is fairly small, but with very big multinational companies, and the company Europe and Saab is one of those. And 45% of our GDP comes from trade with others. I think for the United States, the same figure is about 12 or 15%.
Yeah.
So you realize how dependent we are on these good relationships and subcontractors, open markets, free trade, what have you. So this is an extremely important place to be, both security-wise. We are not a member of NATO, but we build our security together with others, and the US is one of the most important countries for that, but also economically, of course.
Yeah, and the Minister of Defense has been a very frequent visitor to the US for years to underline the importance of that relationship. Moving on to a topic which is very current, the coronavirus. And Sweden has surfaced in the media and been discussed and reflected on both positively and negatively from various sides. And I picked up one headline from CNN last Friday. Sweden says its coronavirus approach has worked. The numbers suggest a different story. So can you give us some insights on how Sweden's approach really looks like and how the country has been impacted to date, and what's behind the numbers. I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah. Well, first I have to give you a history lesson. No, but our setup of our government actually goes back 400 years.
Okay.
We have a very small government with big independent government agencies. They are steered by the government, but they are independent agencies. They are expert agencies. So our public health agency is one of those. So it's not part of the government, but it's part of the running structure of our country. So when we are in crisis or any other, we rely heavily, or our politicians rely heavily on the advice of the expert agencies. And they take a strictly public health approach in their recommendations for policy. So everything that comes out of them is strictly on public health. And what my government early on said was that this is a marathon. We're in a marathon. This is not a sprint. This is something that will be us for a very, very long time. So the measures we have taken have all been within that mindset. Then I think it's also important to realize that all countries are different, and the policies we are taken in each country are of course tailored to that, how that population or how that country works. So it's very difficult to say that one thing that works in one country should work in another country. So we are, to the best of our ability, building our strategy. So the strategy basically is not, in a way, the goal of the strategy is not that different from it's not different from everyone else. It's saving as many lives as possible and keeping our healthcare system functional. So it's not, the famous curve that we were all talking about. If it would be too steep, the stress on the healthcare system would be so big that we couldn't handle it.
And how
so what I said, sorry,
is
yes.
the healthcare system coping at the moment, since we're talking about?
Well, it's the huge strains on it, of course, but we still have room for in the intensive care. We have enough for now resources for that. Stockholm is, of course, mostly hit. We are also now using, the rest of the country is not so badly hit. This is, a scarcely populated place. We're the size of California, but only 10 million people. So the rest of the country has not been hit as hard, and it's slowly spreading. So we are using care facilities in other parts of the country for when Stockholm is packed. And also, so the strategy is both recommendations, but also binding regulations. So, for instance, it's forbidden to visit people in elderly care homes. Social distancing is recommended. Schools are open up till 9th grade if we compare to a US system. High school and universities are closed. Most people are working from home. Travel domestically and abroad is discouraged. Over Easter, we saw a 90% cut in travel in comparison to other years. So how our society works is we have huge trust. The population trusts the politicians and the agencies, and the politicians and agencies trust the population. So that's why we work on recommendation. The biggest failure of what we are doing is that we got the virus into our elderly care homes. And then you must also realize that elderly care in Sweden is when you are extremely weak and old, and usually also demented. So, for instance, my own father, he's 90 years old. He lives at home, but he has home care provided for by the municipality. I think in many other places, maybe he would have been in an elderly care. So people in our elderly care system are very frail. 85% of the deaths in Sweden have occurred for people older than 70 years old. And out of those now 2,586 deaths today, roughly 1,600 are people older than 80. So this is a huge tragedy that it has really hurt our elderly population. And I think that has been, and that's openly said in Sweden, we really have to try to find out how to stop the spread in our elderly care facilities. But sorry, but there's of course an image of Sweden that we can roam out freely. We're all hanging out in the bar. No.
We lost Karin.
Hang on, am I still here? Someone tried to call me. Am I back? Am I here? Yeah. No, but no, you cannot go to a bar in Sweden. There's social distancing at the restaurants. There are restaurants that have been closed because they have not followed the rules. So it's not just, party paradise in Sweden.
I think it's interesting. You said Swedish government give guidance. They trust the population, but also, at least from what I have picked up during surveys and so forth or polls, that it seems like Swedish government is getting pretty good ratings from the citizens too. There's a lot of trust in this approach.
Yes. I saw numbers that 80% could have changed a bit, but I think last week 80% of the population, when they poll, think that the strategy is good.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I mean, we will never know which strategy worked until we are out of this. We are all just trying to do as good as we can, and of course, all lives, every single life is a tragedy that has been lost, of course.
I also feel that that's partially why there's been two sides of the attention in the US.
Mm-hmm.
It's either not being as strict as typically you see from other countries, but it's also being presented as the good case. It seems like a balanced strategy, trying to balance all the implications of a situation, a crisis like this. And also maybe it provides a better groundwork for getting out of this situation, how to open up. So was that, as far as you can see, sort of part of the core strategy initially as well, trying to balance various factors?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, first of all, it was a public health. It is a public health strategy. But of course, keeping our economy fairly open and people able to go to work is also, in a way, part of public health strategy.
Sure.
So because of course loss of work and loss of income puts an enormous stress on society and so on. And it's not that our economy has not been hurt. It really is very, in very, very bad shape. But I think when this crisis started, I remember our public health agency said that it's very easy to take a decision to close down everything. It's a very tough decision to open it up. When do you open it up, and how do you open it up? So my government has said that the strategy we have now, we will not ease that. This is for long term. So if we can keep it at this level, and we don't have to close down schools or quarantine people, that could probably be good in the long run as well. But also every day we can, take a totally different decision. So if the public health authorities feel that all of a sudden we have to close the schools, that will happen, most likely. So it's not that, the strategy lies now, but it can be changed if need be.
Yeah. I guess to some extent that's the advantage of being a smaller country and being a very integrated country, that you can adjust very quickly almost on a day.
No, I think you should compare us to a state in the United States, and various different states here handle it differently as well. According to their reality.
And as you said, I think this is a marathon, and maybe 2 years from now we can really evaluate what was the most efficient way to manage. And there is truly not, from my perspective at least, one size fits all. It's very, very independent, depending on your starting point and your society. Moving on a little bit to Swedish businesses and Swedish companies and how they've been affected so far during the crisis, and maybe more the US aspect of it. Last week, you had a webinar or a meeting, online meeting with leaders of US subsidiaries of Swedish companies. What did you hear from them? What was your takeaways?
Well, first of all, as I said initially, we have quite a large presence of Swedish companies in the United States. We employ about 365,000 people directly, indirectly. This is of course pre-corona. That's about 1 million. So we are the 15th largest investor also in the United States, and we're not exactly the 15th largest country in the world when it comes to population. We're like number 85 or something. So we are very proud. I'm very proud that we have such fantastic business sector in Sweden with great innovative companies and so on. So of course what they said, they all said that sales are down and contracts are lost. Of course, like everyone else, this is very, very difficult and obvious. So far, they seem to have been okay, but everyone was expecting a huge downturn. I think probably they've had resources and so on to keep going for a while, but now it looks extremely hard. Supplies is another thing that's really tough. And as I initially said, I mean, we're really part of a global economy where we're all dependent on the global value chains, and most of our companies are, getting things from all over the place for their production in the United States. Many said that Mexico was now one of the biggest challenges because Mexico has, taken their decisions to home quarantine and so on, which have led to that non-essential business have a hard time operating, which means, of course, it's very difficult to get parts into the United States. So that's a big challenge. They also, it was a bit hard, I think, because just as we talked about Sweden and other countries, the various states in the United States also take different decisions on what's an essential business and what is a non-essential business. So that's challenging for some as well, how to operate in that environment. And I guess that also goes if you have subcontractors in the United States. You might be essential in one state, but your subcontractor is a non-essential one in another state. Yeah. So that, of course, makes the supply chains, the issue of supply chains also really, really difficult. Staff, of course, some places or most places around the US, schools are closed. People have to stay home with their kids, or it's stay-at-home rules, which also affect a lot of companies, of course. And you have to think about hygiene and how do you set up your factory or your office, and I guess now everyone is contemplating on how can you, when you can reopen, what measures should you take then to make it still safe for your colleagues. And also, if you have to make layoffs, it's hard when you're going to recruit back. Maybe they have been lost to some other company, and I mean, employers are usually the most valuable assets of a company. So that's. And as I said, how to open up was also raised at the meeting, that this is something many companies are contemplating, how to do this in a way that gradually makes you come back in business. And of course, we have to get consumption going. I just read an article in New York Times on consumption in China, and they interviewed middle class Chinese people, and they said that, before I used to splurge my whole salary on consumption, but now I'm rethinking it. And of course, that's a huge market for all of us. And they noted there's mobile phone factories producing mobile phones, but there's no one to buy them. So I think a big issue ahead, which we I think need to contemplate for chambers of commerce and think tank communities on, if our consumption patterns change because of this, what will our economies look like in the future? And especially the United States is a consumption-driven economy. Yeah. So I think this will be one of the bigger issues to think about.
If we're sort of moving over to the more broader trade agenda, and maybe we're at a point before the crisis hit, there's been a process many years trying to have a EU-US trade agreement that was sort of put on hold with the new administration, with some new hopes that there could be certain parts that could be carved out into a 2.0 version. Where were we before the crisis hit, and what was your expectations going forward?
Yes, well, trade agreements are usually very difficult to negotiate and to get through your various parliaments once that happens. I mean, it's for a country like mine, as I said before, these free trade agreements are paramount for our economy and so on. And I truly believe that the US and the European Union, which are each other's biggest markets, we must be more strongly linked when it comes to trade. We tried during the previous administration to do parts of it. We are in discussion. I mean, now I'm talking European Union and the United States are in close discussion on a trade agreement. I think it would be crucial, both for kickstarting ourselves after this, if we could have a slim trade agreement. We all know which are the difficult areas. Agriculture is really hard on the European Union side. Public procurement is very difficult on the US side. If we could leave those things aside and go for a more narrow industrial and service agreement, I think it would give a big boost to our economies once we are out of this. It would have been necessary or important before as well, because trade is also not just trade. Trade is also security. So the stronger we are linked with each other, the more the US and the EU can kind of set the rules for the rest of the world. And we are, together, we are all democracies. We stand for human rights and all other issues. And if we are connected even more through trade, other countries who wants to trade with us have to follow those principles that we are agreeing upon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's lots of discussions now on China and the virus and who kind of wins the political narrative after the virus is gone and so on. And I think here it will be even more important for the European Union and the United States to have even closer ties. So I know this is something that will be very difficult, and I think there will also be, probably both in the European Union and in the United States, even more protectionist tendencies, because we have experienced this crisis, and now we want to protect ourselves, and we want to get the jobs back in our own markets. But we can't go back to a world where we are not interconnected. So I think it's important that our politicians, not from like a knee-jerk reaction, goes protectionist and isolationist. We need to really stress how interlinked we are. And if we are going to help countries, all around the globe, and now the pandemic is hitting Africa, we really need to increase our economic possibilities as well.
I sort of look at this as an opportunity also within the European Union to show to its member states and their citizens that here's something we can really work on strongly after the virus. I think there's always that threat of a more isolation, but there's also an opportunity for big cooperation here, I think. So it's going to be interesting to see how that follows. So we talk about EU, US. Are there any particular areas within the Swedish-US relations that's being discussed on the trade agenda, or is that generally folded into the European agenda?
Yes, it is folded into the European Union agenda, because it's the union that is responsible for the trade policy for the totality of the union. But of course, as we are, Sweden and a few other countries are the staunchest free trade proponents in the union. Of course, we stress the importance of this to our US counterparts. So I spent a lot of time in Congress talking about, what would a protectionist agenda mean for Swedish investments in the US, and how many jobs would be lost. And I don't know if someone from IKEA is listening to this, but there's not a single member of Congress who wouldn't like to have an IKEA in its constituency.
Correct.
That's a sign of that you have enough middle class consumers and so on. So that's how we deal with it. And then, of course, we also operate on single issues that companies have. And for instance, now during the coronavirus, we are some of our companies in the medical sector, of course, a bit worried about the supply chains because of the Defense Procurement Act. And it gives priority to US companies before foreign ones. But some of our companies, they need some components from the US, which are then assembled in Sweden or somewhere else, and then it's sold back as really high-end products in the healthcare sector here. So that's something that we worry about bilaterally as well.
You hit on something very interesting there, and something I've seen as well. So sort of on a high level policy, you have certain matters discussed between Europe and US. But kind of when you get down to the state level and you work with the governors, et cetera, there's an enormous interest to generate business and partnership. I have just one recent example for our own company. We were very much courted by lots of states to set up our new factory in Indiana. And there we get a lot of attention on the state level. And here I kind of like to segue into the chambers, the 20 chambers we have around the countries. How important, from your perspective, are they? in sort of nurturing the trade agenda and supporting the trade agenda between Sweden?
I think they are extremely important. Just to describe how we are set up here, I mean, we have an embassy in Washington, and then we have a general consulate in New York. And for the rest of the country, which is an enormous, I mean, this is a continent with basically 50 countries or states, which are individually extremely important. And for the rest of the country, we have honorary consuls, so people who represent us on an honorary way. But then we have all the chambers, and that's of course, and then we have our business export agency as well, Business Sweden. But to really have see the opportunities out in the country, it is the chambers that do that. It's also a great network if you want to, if you're not a big company like Saab, you're a medium-sized company or a smaller company. The contact with a chamber before you decide to invest somewhere is, of course, extremely important, because the people who are members, they know how that state operates and they have the contacts and so on. So it's a network that is crucial, I think, for Swedes coming to the US. And I think that, I know we have talked about it before, but I think we can even develop it more for US investments to Sweden, because all the chambers out in the field or in the various states, they know which companies are in those states who would be a great fit for Sweden and who would really, thrive in my country or in our country instead of some other country in Europe. So it's extremely useful. And as you said, every state is different. Yeah. So you have to know the local parameters and know people is, of course, extremely important. And people who are members of these chambers they have great networks and so on.
You talk about Team Sweden quite a lot. Mm. What is that? And I also know that you had one of your meetings out on the West Coast in Seattle, the most recent one with Team Sweden. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Well, Team Sweden it's not rocket science. When I was Director General for Trade back in Stockholm, we made a new export strategy for Sweden, and we realized that, I mean, we are, of course, an important country, but we're not the superpower or anything like that. We were a superpower. So we need to make use of all the Swedish actors, and we need to pull them together to form a Team Sweden, so that we can help companies in the best way we can. Either if we are, like the chambers, who are private companies teaming up, or it's a government and so on. So we have formed a network in each country where we are present called Team Sweden. We have it in Sweden as well also, actually. And this is a way of trying to help each other, to keep, pass on information, do activities together to highlight Sweden. So every year we have we have a Team Sweden meeting in the US for the American actors, where then people come from Sweden as well out here, and we had it in Seattle this year, and we gather the chambers, we gather our business export agency, embassies, honorary consulates, and so on, to talk about how can we help Swedish business life thrive in the US? What do we need to do? And part of doing that, we have made an analysis of the United States, which are our top 5 states that we should really focus on. And there we have also very tight networks, Team Sweden network. So it's in a way of trying to make that 1 + 1 will equal 3.
Yeah, more bang for the buck.
Yes.
And I want to move over to a couple more general questions. So we get, I mean, I since you assumed this position, I feel that there's been an enormous amount of activities. A lot of ministerial meetings, a lot of delegations, and a lot of interesting issues that you had to handle. And we've had a big industry delegation meeting with the presidents about 1.5 years ago now, I guess. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, so how's the president when you meet him sort of off camera in smaller settings? Is the same, we see him today, every day, more or less? But what's your reaction when you sort of, what do you take away? And what's his perception of Sweden when you meet with him?
Well, right now it's not so positive. He just tweeted this morning
Oh, really?
that he was upset about our corona strategy. But I've only met him twice. First, when you're new as ambassador, you hand over something called letter of credential from the head of state from your country. So I carried with me a letter from the Swedish king that I then handed over to the president. And we talked about, we don't get many minutes, but for the minutes I had, we talked about golf. I play golf, and he's very impressed with the Swedish golfers. And I think he plays with them as well. I know he does. So I gave him a book of the most beautiful golf courses in Sweden. So who knows when he's not president anymore if he will come to Sweden on a golf vacation. No, but he was, of course, interested in our investments and our trade. He's very interested in our business community. He knows them well. So then when the prime minister came a year later, we also had, as you said, a business delegation with us to the White House, which was good. Because he is, of course, very interested in the economy of the U.S. and to strengthen that. So I think it was a very good conversation. We also talk about defense, of course, very interesting, and Saab, your company, is of course heavily involved in that, just as many other Swedish companies. I don't know if all our listeners knows that Sweden has actually a huge defense industry for the size of our country, and that comes out of historical reasons, but that industry is very linked to the U.S. defense sector. So that is an extremely important relationship for us. So no, I think it was positive and good. Then, of course, he has views on Sweden and we have views on the United States, but we have a very close relationship. And as with any friend, we can also bring up tough matters. And we have our defense minister has been here several times, our minister of trade, our minister of foreign affairs, and others as well. We had just had our minister of industry here before we closed down for the corona season. And we are trying to do more collaboration when it comes to research on the big future issues like 5G, and now we talk about 6G, on artificial intelligence and all those kind of big issues as well. So there are lots of possibilities. I think Swedes and Americans are fairly alike, actually.
I agree.
We're very like business-like, so we fit well together. Maybe that's why we are so big here. I don't know.
Thank you so much for this exchange. I'm sure we have a lot of good questions teed up from our audience. So I'd like to see, Johan, are you ready to pick up a few questions from here?
Yes, I'm ready, and we have a lot of questions. So I will pick and choose. And here comes the first question to Ambassador. As we all know, we have a US president election coming up fall 2020. What is your take on how COVID-19 will affect the election and the chances for President Trump to be re-elected?
Well, I think this is something that will affect all elections in both locally, in the US, both locally and on a national level in all our countries. We don't have elections till 2022 in Sweden, but I'm sure that this will be a big issue then as well. So I guess like in all elections, when there is a crisis, the leader will be judged on the handling of the crisis. So I am sure that this will be a big topic in the election campaigns going forward. Then, of course, as we are in the times we are, there's so many discussions on how will the elections take place, and how will the Joe Biden and Donald Trump be able to go out and spread the message to the voters. So it will be a very different election, I'm sure.
So it's quite hard to predict today if the crisis can be positive in this situation for Trump or
I would
for
say
Biden.
it's impossible. I mean, usually an incumbent, as I know, has usually favored position to be re-elected, but this is extremely hard to say. And yes. I think lately, I mean, the last 10 years have shown in a lot of countries that opinion polls are it's hard to say, and also given the how the election system works in the US, it makes it even harder, I think, to predict something. So I've stopped predicting.
Perfect.
Because I don't put my money on the betting sites.
Great answer, Karin. This question was posted by Malin Berg, and I move forward with a question from a gentleman, Brad Olson. And his question is, can you shed some insights as to how Sweden decided and continues to embrace a more open economy approach to decide with the COVID response? And he adds, please keep safe and secure and healthy.
Thank you, Brad. I think it's the Brad I know very well.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Brad. Now, as I said initially, our strategy comes out of the same goal as everyone else has. Saving lives and having the public health system functioning, not having too big spike. So that's why we decided not to close our schools, for instance, because if we did, 85% of Swedes actually work. So if we would have closed the schools for smaller children, it was deemed that estimated that 20 or 30% of the healthcare workers would have to stay at home with their kids. So this would then be a big challenge to the healthcare system. Hopefully, I said earlier, our economy has been hugely hit. Our unemployment numbers are up. Luckily, we have a very, very good economic situation going into it. We had Foreign Minister said yesterday, our debt, in view of GDP, was something above just 20%. So this is our oil reserve. We have money to take. So we can, I think right now with all the stimulus packages, we are up to 45% of GDP in debt, which is really manageable so far, and if it doesn't go a lot bigger. So hopefully this strategy leads to that. Yes, of course, we spend more, larger foreign debt, but a manageable one. And hopefully this means that the stimulus packages that we can afford to take actually will help our businesses staying alive. But of course, you hear from so many businesses in Sweden that they have to shut down. I just heard about a small ladies' clothes shop, impossible to keep that going, and so on, and restaurants and what have you. So the tourism and the hospitality industry is hugely hit.
Okay, thank you, Karin. This is a question from Rolf Bergman, and in an article from NRP a couple of days ago, the ambassador was quoted as saying that 30% of people in Stockholm had been exposed for the virus. Since Sweden has very limited testing, how did you arrive, or how did Sweden arrive to the 30% figure?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, this is information that we have from our public health agency, that the immunity now in Stockholm is around 30%. If we are lucky, so to speak, it's hard to say lucky in this sense because it means people are sick. We might get up to herd immunity in Stockholm area in late May, early June. We will see about that, of course. And how they measure it exactly, I am not sure. I've understood that they have 90 different, public health facilities where they do some kind of regular testing and that's then drawn into some kind of average. So I don't know the exact details of it. I am sure if you are interested in exactly how that's done, you can visit the Public Health Agency's homepage. And they have a lot of information in English for those of you who don't speak Swedish.
Okay, thank you, Karin. And here is a question from Margaret Smith to Michael. The question follows: how is companies like Saab and other bigger Swedish companies affected during this crisis?
That question, yeah, it's a good one because different companies are impacted differently. And in our case, both in Sweden and in US, we are considered as essential business. So that means we are encouraged and expected to carry on our mission as planned and to work on our projects and orders. So for us, the challenge is the health of the employees. How can we do this safely? So for our production sites, we had to introduce certain measures, social distancing, and in some cases, we even measured temperatures for employees coming into the building and so forth, depending on the facility. So I think we've been able to execute very well during this process. Somewhere around 80-85%, I would guess. But it's also a matter of the customer. In this case, in the U.S. Department of Defense has been very, very active on their programs and making sure that we can execute on our orders and our programs. So, and I think it's fairly similar to what we do in Sweden. Same status, and then from everything I hear from my colleagues in Sweden, they are pretty much executing with a little different approach. We have more people in the office. It kind of follows the Swedish strategy, of course. So all in all, and we've been blessed with very few cases of coronavirus. We've had a few employees here in the US, and they are now all back in work again. So far, so good.
Thank you, Michael. And over to Karin, a question from Marie Forsberg-Mare. Any reaction coming into the embassy here in the US in regards on WHO's executive director's announcement yesterday about Sweden as a model for countries going forward?
Well, there are various reactions in the country, both positive and negative. So this has been, what was it? There was an article in the New York Times yesterday by Thomas Friedman, who, balanced both the advantages and disadvantages of our strategy and so on. But of course, Sweden, as I said initially, we have really come in the limelight. I don't think we expected it at all that we would be perceived as so different, but I can understand why there's such a curiosity on this, and maybe then in the end we are not as different as people think when you explain it. And when it comes to the WHO, we really think that this is a very important multilateral organization, extremely important for healthcare globally, and so on. So we don't think that this is the time to leave it or criticize it. We need to help it and be good members right now. Then we can have a discussion later on many international organizations needs reform. And Sweden has been very clear that we need, for instance, a reform of the United Nations and so on. But this is not the time when we are in a pandemic, we believe. So we really hope that the US will come to a conclusion of, keeping its support up for the WHO, because it is a crucial and very important organization for so many countries.
Thank you, Karin. And here's a slightly maybe difficult question from Niklas Komstedt. He is asking about the Swedish tactics, and when Sweden is saying it's working, what is the metric that is ultimately used here? Is it purely health metric, or is economical metrics involved?
We're not saying that. Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
No, I wouldn't say that we are. It depends on what you mean by working. Our country is in, really tough economic times. As I said, unemployment has increased a lot. We think by June we could be up to 11%. As I said, the healthcare sector and the tourism and the hospitality industry is hugely hit. So the government has taken large stimulus packages, economic stimulus packages, and that's why I said our increase of debt to GDP is going up. So we are trying, just like everyone else, to take measures that will lessen the damage for business life and for employment. So, for instance, it used to be that you had to, on the first day you were sick, you didn't get any salary, and that's, of course, to try to diminish. That's gone. Now you get reimbursed from immediately. That also goes now for self-employed people. If you have a small company, we also pay salary compensation to companies and so on. They can apply for that. So there are a lot of stimulus measures taken, just like in the United States. So of course this costs a lot of money, but I think every government does whatever it can to try to keep businesses up and running as much as possible. And then of course it's not possible to help everyone in the end. And
can you
comment there?
Yes, of course, Michael.
So your take on this. I feel Sweden, as you clearly mentioned initially, has tried to find a model that works for Sweden, and I don't feel like Sweden has ever tried to tell anybody else that this is the right way to do it. Sweden's pretty humble about this is challenging. We're evaluating this as this progress. So I think Sweden's position is being a little bit misrepresented sometimes in these conversations, where certain, especially in media, who wants to sort of evaluate this as potentially a better option for someone. But I never think Sweden has taken that position, that this is something we broadcast and offer to others.
A slight follow-up on this question is from Niklas Komstedt. What is the other? I mean, of course, deaths per capita is over time is one metric, but if there are a key economical metric, what is that? And is that communicated?
No, to my mind, I may not have all the information there. That has not been the case. Like your success, you come out of the crisis if your economy is hurt this much or this little, or no, it's not the beauty contest in that sense. I think everyone is trying to do everything they can to keep their possibility of economies to come back, keeping companies under their arms as much as possible. Of course, governments can. We're talking about taxpayers' money here, so of course you can't do everything, and one has to be cautious when it comes to taxpayers' money. But so I think every government around the world is trying to do whatever it can and take the measures that they think are fitting to save as much as possible of the economies, and that's what Sweden is doing as well. And as you mentioned, Michael, we've been very clear from the beginning that this is not every country has to do different, whatever suits their country. This is what we think suits our country.
Great.
And then, of course, loss of lives is the most serious indicator.
Thank you, Karin. To not be a short last question here. It's from Roger Lenovo. Karin, how can you, as an ambassador, promote cultural interactive exchange between Sweden and the US during this pandemic? How is that possible? Is it possible?
Well, yes, it is possible, actually. And I think, depending on how much time you have at your hands, there's so much to see now on the internet. We just talked about it today. Today is International Jazz Day. So we will promote Swedish jazz, for instance. We have fantastic exhibits at our embassy. One is called Smart Mobility. It's a lot of cool innovations from Sweden. We also talk about our failures. Our biggest mobility failure is the Vasa ship. Yes. Took 3 years to build. It sank in the 1600s after like 1 hour voyage. A big failure. Then we have another exhibit at the embassy called Papier. And that is actually super cool clothing made out of paper, together with beautiful aquarelle paintings and some other exhibits. So we have now, from yesterday, put them all online, so you can see them and enjoy them. So we also send out a list that we put on our social media. It's called Sweden Stays Home, or Sweden at Home, I think it is. Where there are links to so many cultural Swedish events, everything from concerts to book readings and what have you. So there's lots to do. I think it's more of finding time for yourself to find all the interesting things. But really do visit us on social media at Embassy of Sweden, and you will find so many links to Swedish culture that you can enjoy if you're interested. And I really hope you do.
Great. Thank you so much.
But nothing beats, of course, going to an exhibit live or going to a huge concert live. And I really hope we will back at big concerts.
We will hope we will be back soon. Thank you so much, Ambassador, and please visit the embassy's webpage, SAC USA's webpage, and a very interesting website of Atlantic Council. And now I would like to leave the word to you, Michael, please.
Thank you, Johan. As I open up with, this is unprecedented times, and you have to look for new solutions. And this was one of those. We have never done a stream live event like this within the SAC USA. So I thought it went pretty well, actually. What do you think, Karin?
We'll see the reviews from the audience.
Yeah, I feel good about it, but I'm sure it was very much due to our special guest today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Thanks to the audience, the SAC network, the extended network with Atlantic Council. Thank you for connecting with us. We will have a second event in 2 weeks, May 15th at 12:30 Eastern. And then we will have Atlantic Council's own Barry Cavell, who you met initially during the event today. And he's going to talk about the geopolitical implications of the coronavirus. So please make sure to save the date. And until then, stay safe.
And wash your hands.
Yes, and wash your hands.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.